"If you're really that good, try to beat me at tennis," said the millionaire to the black driver. Marcus Johnson was wiping down the hood of the silver Lexus when he heard his employer's arrogant voice echo across the mansion's courtyard. The words carried the same tone of contempt he knew all too well after 3 years working for the Whitman family. "If you're really that good, try to beat me at tennis," said Richard Whitman, adjusting the knot of his Italian tie as he watched Marcus instruct Tyler, the young gardener, on the proper way to hold a racket. Marcus stopped what he was doing. His hands, still damp from the cleaning cloth, clenched the fabric tightly. He knew this moment would come one day. Richard had a habit of humiliating the staff whenever the opportunity arose, especially when there were guests at the mansion to witness his moments of superiority. "Are you serious, sir?" asked Marcus, keeping his voice steady, though his heart raced. "I'd bet a full year's salary." "What do you say?" Richard laughed mockingly, gesturing toward the private court he had built in the backyard of the Beverly Hills estate. "Of course, if you have the courage." The other employees began to gather discreetly. Dorothy, the housekeeper who had worked for the family for 15 years, stopped sweeping the porch. Tyler set down the watering can and watched, as did Anthony, the security guard, who stepped out of his booth to see what was happening. Marcus carried a secret he had never shared with anyone in that house, a secret he had buried along with his dreams 5 years earlier when his life had fallen apart. He glanced at the court, then at Richard, and finally at the curious faces of his co-workers. "I accept," said Marcus, slowly removing his rubber gloves. Richard couldn't hide a smug smile. Another chance to show his superiority to the staff, he thought. After all, he had played tennis at the club since childhood, took private lessons twice a week, and regularly competed in the social tournaments of New York's elite. "Excellent," Richard clapped his hands. "Let's make this more interesting. If I win, not only do you lose a year's salary, but I want you to apologize in front of everyone for thinking you were better than your employer." Marcus nodded silently. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from a mix of suppressed anger and nerves. It had been so long since he'd last stepped onto a tennis court for anything other than a quick cleaning or maintenance. "And if I win?" asked Marcus, surprising everyone, including himself. Richard burst into laughter. "If you win, which we all know won't happen, I'll pay you double your salary for 6 months. How's that?" The staff exchanged glances. Dorothy shook her head, worried. She had known Richard for years and knew how he got when things didn't go his way. Tyler, on the other hand, secretly rooted for Marcus, who had always treated him with respect and patience. "Then let's settle this now," said Richard, loosening his tie. "Anthony, go fetch my gym clothes from my room. Marcus, I hope you have something suitable to play in." Marcus nodded. He always kept extra clothes in his car, a habit he'd held on to from the days when he needed to be ready for anything. As he walked to the vehicle, he felt everyone's eyes on him. Dorothy approached when he returned with a sports bag. "Marcus, my dear, are you sure about this? Mr. Richard doesn't like to lose. He could make your life very difficult here." "Mrs. Dorothy, there are things in life we can't let pass," replied Marcus, gently touching the older woman's shoulder. "Sometimes we have to face situations, even knowing the risks." 20 minutes later, the two men were on the court. Richard wore a pristine white tennis outfit, with a professional racket that cost more than Marcus's monthly salary. The driver had on a simple t-shirt and black shorts, carrying a racket he'd borrowed from the court's maintenance equipment. The staff positioned themselves on the makeshift stands, some crates and plastic chairs Tyler had quickly arranged. The tension was palpable, as if everyone knew this moment would define far more than just a simple tennis match. "Let's warm up first," Richard said, stretching with exaggerated movements. "I don't want you complaining later that you didn't have time to prepare." During the warm-up, something shifted in Richard's expression. He had expected to see an amateur holding the racket awkwardly, but Marcus moved across the court with a natural grace that was impossible to miss. His movements were fluid, precise, and every stroke carried a technique that only came with years of practice. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now back to the story. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Richard asked, trying to sound casual but already showing signs of concern. "Here and there," Marcus replied vaguely, focused on his movements. The truth was far more complicated. Marcus Johnson had once been one of the most promising tennis coaches in New York between the ages of 25 and 30. With a degree in physical education from Columbia University, he had worked with some of the best amateur players in the state and dreamed of opening his own tennis academy. But that was a past he had buried along with many other things. Richard started the match confidently, but his first serves were easily returned by Marcus with a precision that left the businessman uneasy. The driver didn't just return the balls, he placed them exactly where he wanted, forcing Richard to run more than he was used to. "Let's make it official," Richard announced, trying to regain his confidence. Best of 3 sets. The first game was completely dominated by Marcus. His serves were powerful and precise, and his baseline shots forced Richard into making basic mistakes. The score quickly went to 1-0. Dorothy wrung her hands in her apron, worried about the consequences of all this. Tyler, on the other hand, began to smile subtly with every point Marcus won. Anthony kept a neutral expression, but deep down, he was impressed by his colleague's technical skill. Richard was starting to sweat more than usual, and it wasn't just from the physical exertion. The humiliation of losing to an employee in front of the others was something his arrogant personality couldn't quite process. "You're getting lucky with these shots," Richard remarked between points, "but luck doesn't last forever." Marcus didn't respond. He was completely focused on the game, as if every movement was automatic, ingrained in muscle memory after years of practice. It was strange how his body still remembered every motion, even after so much time away from the courts. The second game also went to Marcus, 2-0. Richard was visibly growing irritated, his shots becoming more aggressive and less precise. He began questioning calls, claiming balls that were clearly in had gone out. "That ball was out!" Richard shouted after a perfect return from Marcus. "Mr. Richard, the ball landed right on the line," Marcus said calmly. "I'm the one who decides here." Richard slammed his racket on the ground. "This is my house, my court, my rules." That's when a firm, authoritative woman's voice echoed from near the house. "Richard Whitman, what kind of disgrace is this?" Everyone turned to see an elegant woman in her 70s approaching the court. It was Eleanor Whitman, Richard's mother, a woman who had built the family empire alongside her late husband and had never fully approved of her son's arrogance. "Mother, what are you doing here?" Richard asked, visibly embarrassed. "I came to visit my son and find him causing a scene in the backyard like a spoiled child," Eleanor replied, adjusting her glasses to get a better look at the situation. "And, apparently, losing badly to the chauffeur." Richard flushed. His mother's presence always made him uneasy, especially when she witnessed his less noble moments. "I'm not losing," Richard lied. "We've only just started." Eleanor walked straight to the makeshift bleachers and sat beside Dorothy. "Dorothy, explain to me what's happening here." The housekeeper respectfully recounted the bet and the challenge. Eleanor listened in silence, shaking her head occasionally. "Continue the game," she told the two men, "but I want it to be fair and honest. Richard, stop this nonsense of questioning obvious calls." Eleanor's presence completely changed the dynamic of the match. Richard became more restrained but also more agitated. Marcus, on the other hand, seemed more relaxed, as if the presence of a maternal figure brought a sense of justice to the situation. The third game was even more dominant for Marcus. His shots grew increasingly precise, and Richard was clearly losing his composure. The score was now 3-0, and the first set was quickly heading toward a crushing victory for the chauffeur. "Where did you learn to play tennis?" Eleanor asked Marcus directly during a break. Marcus hesitated before answering. "At university, Mom, and later, well, I gave some private lessons." Richard grew more frustrated. His attempts at psychological intimidation weren't working, and his technique was being completely outmatched. When he lost the fourth game, he exploded. "This can't be possible," Richard shouted. "You must be cheating somehow." "How could I cheat at tennis, Mr. Whitman?" Marcus asked, genuinely confused. "I don't know, but something's not right. A chauffeur doesn't play tennis like this." "Richard," Eleanor's voice cut through the air like a whip. "Act like a grown man." But Richard was beyond reason. The public humiliation was shattering his ego, and he couldn't accept that an employee could be better than him at anything. "Prove you actually know how to play tennis," Richard demanded. "I want to see documents, certificates, anything that proves you're not deceiving me." Marcus paused. The demand touched something deep and painful in his memory. Slowly, he walked to his sports bag and pulled out an old wallet. From it, he removed a faded, crumpled photograph. "Do you know Andre Agassi?" Marcus asked, handing over the photo. Richard took the picture, and his eyes widened. It showed a younger Marcus standing beside the famous American tennis player, both smiling and holding trophies. "This photo, when was it taken?" Richard asked weakly. "In 2018. I was an assistant coach at the New York City tournament. Andre was there as a special guest, and this was taken after a clinic we organized for young talents." Eleanor stood and stepped closer to see the photograph. Her face showed surprise, then something like recognition. "Marcus, by any chance, did you give private lessons here in Beverly Hills?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am. For a few years. Before I had to change careers." "You were my husband's coach," said Eleanor, her voice thick with emotion. "William Whitman. He always spoke of the best tennis teacher he'd ever had. Said you had a gift for teaching and endless patience." Richard let the photograph slip from his fingers. The world around him seemed to crumble. The man he humiliated daily, the one he treated as inferior, had been his own father's tennis coach. "This can't be true," murmured Richard. "Your father was a wonderful man," said Marcus, his voice tinged with nostalgia. "Respectful, humble. He treated everyone with dignity. He improved so much after we started working together." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. "He always said you changed his life, that it wasn't just about tennis, but discipline, respect, personal growth." "What happened?" asked Richard, completely shaken. "Why did you stop teaching?" Marcus hesitated. This was the most painful part of his story, the reason he'd abandoned everything he loved. "After your father passed, some rumors started circulating at the club. They said I was taking advantage, overcharging older students, that I wasn't trustworthy. The gossip started small, but spread fast." "What kind of rumors?" pressed Eleanor. "They said I only taught for the money, that I didn't really care about my students. Some influential club members began spreading that I wasn't qualified, that I was just a fraud." Marcus paused, the memories still raw. "Within 6 months, I lost all my students." Richard felt the ground give way beneath him. He was beginning to grasp the magnitude of his own unconscious cruelty. "And then?" Eleanor asked gently. "I tried starting over at other clubs, but the bad reputation followed me. No one wanted to risk hiring someone with reputation issues." Marcus looked directly at Richard. "I had to find work elsewhere. Driving was something I knew how to do well, so I became a private chauffeur." Just then, an elegant woman in her 40s approached the court. It was Jennifer Whitman, Richard's wife, returning from her morning shopping. "What's going on here?" Jennifer asked, taking in the scene. Her husband visibly shaken, her mother-in-law in tears, and all the staff gathered on the court. "Your husband challenged Marcus to a tennis match," Eleanor explained, "and we just found out Marcus was your father-in-law's coach." Jennifer looked at Marcus with renewed interest. She'd always noticed how respectful and competent he was, unlike the other drivers who'd worked for the family before. "You taught tennis to Richard's father?" she asked. "For 3 years," Marcus confirmed. "The best years of my career." Richard was still processing everything when Jennifer asked a question that made him even more uncomfortable. "And how did you end up working here as a driver?" "I needed to support my family," Marcus replied simply. "My daughter Emily needs specialized medical care. She has a neurological condition that requires constant therapy and expensive medication. When I lost my tennis students, I had to take whatever job paid well." Dorothy, who knew Marcus's family situation, nodded in confirmation. She was aware of the struggles he faced and had always admired how he never complained, even when Richard treated him with disrespect. Jennifer felt a wave of shame over her husband's behavior. She hadn't known the details of Marcus's situation, but now it all made sense. His dedication, his patience with the humiliations, how he never missed work or complained. "How old is your daughter?" Jennifer asked kindly. 12, replied Marcus, his voice softening as he spoke of his daughter. "She's an incredible girl, very smart. She loves when I tell her stories about tennis, about the players I've met." Richard looked around and realized everyone was staring at him with a mix of disappointment and embarrassment. His wife, his mother, the staff, they had all witnessed not just his defeat in the match, but the revelation of his ignorance about the man he mistreated daily. "Let's continue the game," Richard said abruptly, trying to regain some control. "Richard," Jennifer said firmly, "haven't you humiliated Marcus enough?" "He accepted the challenge," Richard protested, "and I'll prove I can beat him." Eleanor stood and walked over to her son. "Richard, you've already proven one thing today. You've proven you can be even more disappointing than I imagined." His mother's words stung more than any loss in the game. Richard felt as though his entire identity was being questioned. He had always seen himself as superior, successful, respected. Discovering he had been mistreating someone who deserved respect and recognition was devastating to his pride. "I want to continue," Richard insisted. "The game isn't over." Marcus, who had remained silent during the family argument, finally spoke. "If you wish to continue, I won't object. But I'd like to make one thing clear. I'm not here to humiliate anyone. I accepted the challenge because sometimes in life, we must face situations that test us." Richard nodded reluctantly. Deep down, he knew he had already lost far more than a tennis match, but his wounded pride wouldn't let him quit. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now, back to the story. The match resumed, but the atmosphere was entirely different now. The first set ended quickly, with Marcus winning 6-1. Richard was completely unfocused, his movements tense, his plays increasingly desperate. During the break between sets, Jennifer approached Marcus. "May I ask you something personal?" she said. "Why did you never tell us about your past, about your qualifications?" Marcus thought for a moment before answering. "Because I've learned that sometimes it's better to keep certain things to yourself. When you lose something you love deeply, talking about it only makes the pain worse." "But you could have gotten other jobs, better positions." "Mrs. Jennifer, with all due respect, I tried. But when your reputation is tarnished in a small community like elite tennis, doors close fast." Marcus paused. "And I couldn't afford to stay unemployed while searching for something better. Emily needed treatments. Jennifer felt the weight of responsibility. As Richard's wife, she had been a silent accomplice to the disrespect Marcus endured. She had never questioned it, never bothered to learn the staff's stories." Richard, overhearing the conversation, felt a confusing mix of guilt and anger. Anger at being deceived about who Marcus really was, and guilt for mistreating someone facing far greater struggles than his own. The second set went even worse for Richard. Marcus wasn't just playing better technically. He was playing with an emotional freedom that came from finally being able to show who he truly was. Every stroke expressed years of pent-up frustration, suppressed talent and dignity, maintained despite humiliation. Tyler, watching from the sidelines, was fascinated. He had never seen anyone play tennis with such elegance and precision. For him, coming from a humble family, seeing Marcus, someone like him, demonstrating such skill was inspiring. "Mrs. Dorothy," Tyler whispered, "Mr. Marcus plays just like the players on TV." "Better," Dorothy replied proudly. "He's got class, something a lot of spoiled rich kids out there don't have." Richard was losing the second set 4-1 when he started doing something that surprised everyone. He began playing more defensively, trying to observe and learn Marcus's moves. It was as if something in his competitive mind had shifted from destroy the opponent to understand the opponent. "You've got a technique very different from what they teach at the club's training program," Richard remarked during a break. "Everyone has a natural style," Marcus explained. "My job as a coach has always been to bring out the best in each student, not force a single standard." "And my father? How did he play?" "Your father had a more classic style, very elegant. He liked smart plays, not just brute force." Marcus smiled for the first time since the match began. He always said tennis was like chess, but with your whole body. Richard stopped playing completely for a moment. That phrase was something his father used to say, a comparison he'd forgotten over the years. "He really said that?" Richard asked, his voice softer. "Many times, and he was right. Tennis isn't just about strength or speed. It's about strategy, patience, reading your opponent." For a few minutes, Richard forgot he was in a competition. He started asking technical questions, and Marcus naturally began teaching. He explained positioning, timing, how to read an opponent's movements. Jennifer, watching from the sidelines, was struck by the shift in the dynamic between the two men. It was as if Richard had momentarily set aside his arrogance to connect with something deeper. But the transformation was brief. When Richard realized he was being taught by an employee in front of everyone, his defensiveness came back in full force. "Enough talking," Richard said sharply. "Let's finish this." The rest of the second set was an even clearer display of Marcus's technical superiority. Frustrated by having momentarily let his guard down, Richard returned to playing aggressively and recklessly. The set ended 6-2 for Marcus. Richard was clearly beaten, but his pride wouldn't let him simply accept defeat. During the break before the third set, he tried one last strategy. "Marcus," Richard said, trying to sound casual, "how about we make a different deal?" "What kind of deal?" Marcus asked, wary. "If you lose this last set, I'll pay for your daughter's full treatment. 6 months of private physical therapy, the best doctors, everything she needs." The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone present immediately understood what Richard was doing, trying to bribe Marcus into losing on purpose. Jennifer was mortified. "Richard, you can't be serious." "It's a generous offer," Richard insisted. "He stands to gain much more by losing one set than by winning the whole bet." Marcus stood motionless for several seconds. The offer was tempting in a way that physically hurt. 6 months of private treatment for Emily could completely change her life. It was exactly what he wanted most in the world. Dorothy watched Marcus with concern. She knew how much he sacrificed for his daughter and understood the impossible position Richard had put him in. "Can I have a moment to think?" Marcus asked. "Of course," Richard said, convinced he'd found the perfect solution. Marcus stepped away a few paces and closed his eyes. In his mind, he could see Emily's face, his brave daughter who faced every physical therapy session without complaint. He could imagine what it would be like to give her the best treatment available. But he could also hear the voice of his father, who had passed away 10 years ago, and had always taught him that dignity was the only possession no one could take from him. And he could recall William Whitman's words, who always said integrity was more valuable than any easy victory. When Marcus opened his eyes, his decision was made. "Mr. Richard, I appreciate the offer, but I must decline." Richard couldn't hide his surprise. "You're turning down a chance to help your own daughter." "I'm choosing to help my daughter the right way," Marcus replied firmly. "I want her to be proud of the father she has, not to find out one day that I sold my dignity." Eleanor rose from the stands and approached Marcus. "You're exactly as I expected you to be," she said, extending her hand. "William always said you were a man of exceptional character." Richard flushed with anger and humiliation. His bribe attempt had been publicly rejected, and now even his own mother was siding with the driver. "Fine, then let's see this circus through to the end," Richard said bitterly. The third set began with Richard playing even more aggressively, as if he could make up for his lack of skill with sheer physical force. But the strategy backfired. The harder he hit, the more mistakes he made. Marcus, on the other hand, was playing the best tennis of his life. His decision to uphold his integrity had unleashed an energy he hadn't felt in years. Every move was precise, every stroke calculated, every point won with the grace of a true professional. "My goodness," Jennifer whispered to Eleanor. "He plays like a pro." "Because he is a pro," Eleanor replied. "That's what Richard can't understand. It's not about money or social status. It's about skill and character." Richard was leading the third set 4-0 when something in Richard's mind finally snapped. The reality of his total defeat, not just in the game but morally, became inescapable. "I forfeit," Richard said, throwing his racket to the ground. "Mr. Richard?" Marcus asked, genuinely surprised. I said I forfeit, Richard shouted. You win. Are you happy? You've proven you're better than me. But instead of celebrating, Marcus approached Richard with an understanding expression. Mr. Richard, I didn't want to prove I'm better than you. Everyone has their own strengths and struggles. Don't patronize me, Richard snapped. It's not patronizing, it's the truth. Marcus paused. You're an excellent businessman. You build companies, create jobs, support a family. All I know is how to play tennis and drive cars. Richard stared at Marcus, a mix of confusion and irritation in his eyes. He had expected gloating, humiliation, some kind of revenge. Instead, Marcus was being magnanimous. Jennifer stepped closer to the two men. Richard, you need to apologize, she said firmly. For what? Richard asked, still defensive. For years of disrespect, for mistreating someone who deserves admiration, not humiliation. Jennifer, stay out of this. No, I won't. Jennifer's voice rose, surprising everyone. I'm tired of staying silent while you treat people as if they're beneath us just because they work for us. Richard was stunned. Jennifer had always been a submissive wife, never confronting him publicly. You're embarrassing me in front of the staff, he muttered. You've already embarrassed yourself, Jennifer shot back. I'm just acknowledging the truth. Eleanor joined the conversation. Richard, when you were a child, your father and I tried to teach you respect and humility. Clearly, we failed somewhere along the way. You didn't fail, said Richard, his voice finally cracking. I chose to ignore what you taught me. It was the first genuine display of vulnerability Richard had shown in years. For a moment, the mask of arrogance fell away completely. Marcus watched the family dynamic unfold and made a decision. Mr. Richard, I don't want the Betts prize. What do you mean? Asked Richard. Winning or losing money won't change anything in your life. But this experience, maybe it can change something more important. Richard looked at Marcus with genuine curiosity for the first time. What are you saying? I'm saying sometimes we need to lose something to gain something greater. You lost a tennis match, but maybe you can gain a new perspective on the people around you. Dorothy, who had been silently observing everything, finally spoke. Mr. Richard, Marcus is one of the most honorable men I've ever known. He works hard, treats everyone with respect, and never complains, even when... She paused, choosing her words carefully. Even when he isn't treated the way he deserves. Richard felt the weight of Dorothy's words. She had been with the family for 15 years, forming an almost maternal bond with him, and her opinion mattered more than he wanted to admit. Dorothy, Richard began, but couldn't finish. You're a good man at heart, Dorothy said gently, but sometimes you forget that we all have stories, struggles, and dreams. Marcus has a wonderful daughter, fights every day to give her the best and never loses his patience or manners. Richard looked around and saw all the staff gathered, Dorothy, Tyler, Anthony, and even a few others who had quietly stepped closer. People he saw every day but had never truly known. I didn't know about your daughter, Richard said to Marcus. About your struggles, your qualifications, your story. You never asked, Marcus replied without malice. That's true. I never asked. Richard paused. I never cared to. Jennifer watched the conversation with a mix of hope and skepticism. She had known her husband for 15 years and understood how he could be genuinely remorseful one moment and revert to old habits within days. Richard, Jennifer said, if you really want to change something, you have to show it with actions, not just words. What do you suggest? Start by treating Marcus and all the staff with the respect they deserve. Learn their names, their stories, their needs. Eleanor approached her son and placed a hand on his shoulder. Richard, your father always said a man's character is revealed not in how he treats his superiors, but in how he treats those who depend on him. Richard closed his eyes for a moment, remembering his father. William Whitman had been respected not just for his wealth, but for his integrity. He treated every employee in the family business as valuable, knew their families, and helped in times of hardship. Marcus, Richard said, opening his eyes, I'd like to apologize. Not just for today's match, but for years of disrespect. Marcus nodded silently, waiting for him to continue. I've behaved like an arrogant fool. I treated you as inferior when in truth you've shown far more class and dignity than I ever have. The words came out with difficulty, but Richard seemed sincere. And I'd like to make you an offer, he continued. Not a bet or a challenge, but an honest one. What kind of offer? Marcus asked cautiously. I want you to start teaching tennis again. I can help you set up a school, get students, rebuild your reputation. Marcus Johnson fell silent for several seconds, processing the offer. Why would you do that? Because it's the right thing to do. And because... Richard Whitman paused. Because I'd like to be your first student. The statement shocked everyone. Jennifer widened her eyes. Eleanor smiled for the first time that day, and the staff exchanged surprised glances. You want me to give you tennis lessons? Asked Marcus, incredulous. I want to learn, not just tennis, but the right way to play. With respect, patience, humility. Richard looked directly at Marcus. Things my father learned from you that I never had the chance to learn. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. Marcus was visibly moved. The possibility of teaching again, of doing what he loved, was something he had buried so long ago, he hardly dared to dream of it. I would need to think about it, Marcus said. It's a big change. Of course, Richard replied, and regardless of your decision about the lessons, I'd like to help with your daughter's treatment, not as a lost bet, but because it's the right thing to do. Jennifer stepped closer to her husband. Richard, are you sure about this? This change of heart? Jennifer, I know I have a lot to prove, not just to you, but to everyone here. Richard looked around. I've become someone my own father would be ashamed of. Eleanor approached and hugged her son. Your father would be proud to see you acknowledging your mistakes and trying to make them right. Tyler, who had stayed quiet throughout the discussion, finally spoke. Mr. Johnson, can I ask you something? Of course, Tyler. Could you teach me how to play tennis too? Marcus smiled, the first genuine expression of joy he'd shown in a long time. It would be my pleasure, Tyler. Dorothy walked up to Marcus. My boy, you deserve every opportunity coming your way. I always knew you were special. Thank you, Dorothy. You've always been like a mother to all of us here. Richard watched the interactions among the staff and noticed something he'd never seen before. They were like a family. They cared for each other, supported one another, and formed bonds that went beyond work. Marcus, Richard said, can I ask you a personal question? Go ahead. How did you keep your dignity and respect after everything you went through? After losing your career, being humiliated, having to take a job beneath your qualifications? Marcus took a moment before answering, my daughter. Every time I wanted to give up, respond in anger, or lose patience, I thought of her. What kind of man did I want her to see as her father? What kind of example did I want to set? And was that enough? Most of the time, and when it wasn't, I reminded myself that hardships are temporary, but character is permanent. Richard felt as though Marcus was speaking a language he'd forgotten how to understand. The idea of sacrificing pride for something greater, of holding on to principles under pressure, was something he'd lost in his privileged life. Jennifer, listening to the conversation, had an idea. Marcus, why don't you bring your daughter here to meet us? I'd love to get to know her. That would be wonderful, Marcus replied, clearly moved by the thought. And maybe she could use our pool for aquatic therapy, Eleanor suggested. I'm sure it would help her. Marcus had to step away for a moment to keep from crying in front of everyone. The offers of help were coming from people he had considered unreachable in terms of social class just an hour earlier. Anthony, who had remained quiet throughout the entire situation, approached Marcus. Man, I always knew you were different. The way you treat everyone, how you never complain, how hard you work. Anthony paused. Now I understand why. Thank you, Anthony. That means a lot. Richard observed these interactions and realized he had been living like a stranger in his own home. His employees had relationships, stories, and connections he had never noticed or valued. Dorothy, Richard said, how long have you worked for our family? 15 years, Mr. Richard. And I never asked about your family, your dreams, your struggles. Dorothy smiled gently. It's never too late to start, Mr. Richard. Tell me about your family. Dorothy was surprised by the sudden interest, but began speaking about her 3 children, the difficulties of raising them alone after her husband's passing, and her dreams of seeing the youngest enter college. Tyler also shared his story. He came from a family of farmers, dreamed of studying agronomy, and worked to save money for school. Anthony spoke about his calling for security, how he took his job seriously because he understood the responsibility of protecting a family. Richard listened in silence, realizing he had been blind to the lives of the people who worked for him. Why did you never tell me these stories before? He asked. Because you never asked, Dorothy replied kindly, and because, well, it always seemed like you weren't interested. Richard felt the weight of truth in her answer. He had created an environment where employees felt like mere cogs in a machine, not people with stories and dreams. That's going to change, Richard said firmly. Starting today, I want to know you as people, not just as employees. Jennifer smiled, seeing a genuine transformation in her husband's behavior. Richard, I'm proud of you, she said, touching his arm. I still have a lot to learn, he replied humbly. Marcus, who had observed the entire conversation, approached Richard. Mr. Richard, about your offer to help me return to teaching tennis. Yes, I accept, but on one condition. What is it? I want it to be a real partnership, not charity, not guilt, but a business where everyone benefits. I teach, you learn, and together we build something good. Richard extended his hand to Marcus. Partners. Partners, Marcus confirmed, shaking his hand. Eleanor watched the scene with tears in her eyes. William would be so proud, she murmured. Of whom, Mother? Richard asked. Both of you. Of Marcus for keeping his dignity and character despite everything, and of you for finally finding the humility your father and I tried to teach you. Jennifer approached Marcus. Marcus, when you bring your daughter here, I'd like to talk to her about treatments. I know some of the best specialists in the city. Mrs. Jennifer, I don't know how to thank you. No need to thank me. Just keep being the honorable man you've always been. Tyler raised his hand timidly. Mr. Marcus, when we start the tennis lessons, can I bring my younger brother? He loves sports too. Of course, Tyler. In fact, I'm thinking of creating a program for kids in the area. Free lessons for those who can't afford it. Richard was surprised by the proposal. Free lessons? Yes, it's something I always wanted to do when I had my own school. Democratize access to sports. Give opportunities to kids who wouldn't normally have the chance to learn. That's a wonderful idea, Richard said, genuinely impressed. We can do this as part of our project. Jennifer had another idea. What if we also create a scholarship program for young talents who want to pursue a career in tennis? Marcus Johnson was visibly moved by the possibilities unfolding. It would be a dream come true, he said. Dorothy approached Richard Whitman. Mr. Richard, may I say something? Of course, Dorothy. You've always been a good boss in terms of paying on time and offering good benefits. But today you showed you can be much more than that. You can be someone who changes people's lives for the better. Richard felt an emotion he hadn't experienced in years, the genuine satisfaction of doing something that truly mattered. Dorothy, I want you to know I've always valued your work, even if I haven't shown it properly. I know, Mr. Richard, but it's good to hear. Anthony walked up to the group. Folks, I don't want to ruin the moment, but it's getting really hot out here in the sun. How about we continue this conversation in the shade? Everyone laughed, and the tension that had dominated the morning finally dissolved completely. As they walked toward the house's porch, Marcus approached Richard. Mr. Richard, may I make a suggestion about our tennis lessons? Of course. How about we start with the basics, not just playing techniques, but the philosophy behind the sport. Respect for the opponent, the importance of patience, how to handle frustration. Richard smiled. I think I'll need those lessons on frustration a lot. We all do, Marcus replied. Tennis is a sport that teaches humility to those willing to learn. Jennifer, overhearing the conversation, remarked, Sounds like you're already starting the first lesson. True, Richard chuckled, and I'm already learning that I have much more to learn than I thought. Eleanor joined the group on the porch. Marcus, I'd love for you to join us for dinner tonight. I want to hear more stories about the time you spent with William. It would be an honor, Mrs. Eleanor. Richard realized that for the first time in years, his house felt like a real home. The artificial barriers between employers and employees were breaking down, replaced by genuine human connections. Dorothy, Richard said, how about we prepare a special dinner tonight to celebrate new beginnings? It would be my pleasure, Mr. Richard. I'll make that recipe your mother always loved. And Tyler, Richard continued, why don't you call your family and invite them all to join us? Tyler was stunned. Really, Mr. Richard? Really? I want to meet the family of the man who takes such good care of our garden. Anthony clapped his hands. This is going to be amazing. We're finally having a real party here. Marcus watched everything with a mix of joy and surprise. In just a few hours, his life had completely changed. Not just because of the prospect of teaching tennis again, but because he felt part of something bigger, a community where he was valued and respected. Jennifer approached Marcus. Marcus, I know this might sound strange, but I'd also like to apologize. Why, Mrs. Jennifer? For being a silent observer of my husband's disrespectful behavior. I should have spoken up sooner. Mrs. Jennifer, everyone finds their courage to do what's right in their own time. You always have the right words, don't you? Jennifer smiled. My mother used to say that the right words cost the same as the wrong ones, so you might as well choose carefully. Richard, overhearing the conversation, stepped closer. Your mother sounds like she was a very wise woman. She was. She worked her whole life as an office cleaner, but she taught me lessons no university could. Like what? That dignity doesn't depend on the work you do, but on how you do your work. That respect is earned through actions, not positions. That true wealth lies in how you treat people. Richard remained silent for a moment, absorbing the words. Your mother would be proud of the man you've become, said Eleanor. I hope so, replied Marcus. She always said our actions echo far beyond what we can imagine. Dorothy, who had gone to prepare dinner, returned with a tray of iced juices. I thought you might be thirsty after all this excitement, she said with a smile. Dorothy, you always think of everything, said Jennifer gratefully. It's my job to take care of this family, Dorothy replied, and now our family has grown a little larger. Dorothy's observation touched Richard deeply. The idea that the staff considered themselves part of an extended family was something he'd never considered. Dorothy, may I ask you something? Said Richard. Of course. Have you always felt like part of the family, or is this something new? Dorothy exchanged glances with Tyler and Anthony before answering. Among us staff, we've always been a family. We support each other, share joys and sorrows, look out for one another. She paused. Today was the first time we felt you saw us that way too. Richard felt a pang of sadness for missing years of genuine connections due to his arrogance. That will change too, Richard promised. I want this house to be a place where everyone feels valued and respected. Marcus raised his glass of juice. How about a toast? To new beginnings and second chances. Everyone raised their glasses. To second chances, repeated Richard, looking directly at Marcus. To the family we choose, added Jennifer. To mutual respect, said Eleanor. To the dignity of honest work, contributed Dorothy. To dreams we never give up on, said Tyler. And to protecting what truly matters, finished Anthony. As they drank, each person reflected on the extraordinary events of the morning. A simple tennis match had turned into a quiet revolution of attitudes and relationships. Marcus looked at the court, where it had all begun hours earlier. You know, Mr. Whitman, I never imagined that court would become the place where my life changed forever. Mine too, replied Richard. I discovered that sometimes we need to lose something to gain something far more valuable. What did you gain? Asked Jennifer curiously. Richard thought for a moment. Perspective, humility, and perhaps for the first time in years, genuine self-respect. How so? Today, I behaved like the man my father taught me to be, not the arrogant businessman I became. And that reminded me of who I truly want to be. Eleanor smiled proudly. Your father always said, true success is measured by how we treat those who can offer us nothing in return. And today I failed that test miserably, admitted Richard. But I hope to get a chance to retake it. Marcus laughed at the comparison. Everyone deserves a second chance, Mr. Whitman, and some people need more than two. Would you give me as many chances as I needed? Asked Richard. However many it takes for you to become your best self. Jennifer watched the interaction between the two men and noticed something beautiful developing. What had begun as an employer-employee dynamic was turning into a genuine friendship based on mutual respect. Tyler approached Marcus. Mr. Johnson, can I ask what it's like having a daughter? I only have brothers. Marcus's face lit up. It's the most terrifying and wonderful thing in the world at the same time. You discover you're capable of loving in a way you never knew existed, and you also realize you do anything, absolutely anything, to protect and care for her. That must be why you put up with so much without complaining, Tyler observed. Partly for her, partly because I've learned complaining changes nothing. But keeping your dignity always makes a difference. Richard Whitman was absorbing every word of this conversation. The idea of sacrificing personal pride for something greater was a concept he was only beginning to understand. Marcus, may I meet your daughter tomorrow? Richard asked. I'd like to better understand her needs for treatment. Of course, she'll be thrilled. Whenever I tell her stories about work, she gets curious about the family I work for. What do you tell her about us? Jennifer asked. Marcus hesitated for a moment. Well, I always focused on the positive things. The beautiful house, the pool, the garden Tyler tends to with such care. And how I treated you, Richard pressed. I never wanted her to grow up with anger or resentment in her heart. So I always said different people express their personalities in different ways. Richard was struck by the maturity and generosity of the response. You're a better father than I deserved as an employer. Mr. Whitman, we're all always learning and growing. What matters is being willing to change when needed. Dorothy returned from the kitchen. Dinner is almost ready, and I took the liberty of inviting Anthony's wife and Tyler's children. I hope you don't mind. Of course not, Jennifer said. The more, the merrier. Actually, Richard said, Marcus, why don't you call your wife and daughter too? I want them to be part of this celebration. Marcus was visibly moved. Mr. Whitman, I'm not married. I raise Emily alone. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know. Her mother left us when she found out about Emily's neurological condition. Said she wasn't prepared for that kind of responsibility. The silence that followed was heavy. No one knew what to say. That must have been very hard, Jennifer said gently. It was, but it also showed me what I was capable of. I discovered a strength I didn't know I had. And Emily? How does she handle all this? Eleanor asked. She's amazing, stronger than me, more optimistic, wiser. Sometimes I feel she takes care of me more than I do her. Richard was processing this information, feeling an even heavier weight of guilt for mistreating a man who carried so much responsibility alone. Marcus, I have no words to express how terrible I feel for making your life even harder. Mr. Whitman, the past is past. What matters is what we do from now on. But how can you be so generous after everything? Because holding on to anger and resentment only hurts the one who holds it. And because my daughter is watching how I handle difficulties, I want her to learn we can always choose to forgive and move forward. Jennifer stepped closer to Marcus. Your daughter is lucky to have a father like you. I'm the lucky one to have a daughter like her. She teaches me something new every day about courage, patience, gratitude. Anthony joined the conversation. Marcus, I never told you this, but you inspire me greatly. The way you face challenges, always with dignity, always respectful. It helps me be a better person too. Anthony, that means so much to me. All of you help me in ways you can't imagine." Richard watched these interactions and realized there was a network of mutual support among the staff he'd never noticed. They influenced each other positively, supported one another, grew together. "Why did you never include me in these conversations?" Richard asked. "In this mutual support," Dorothy replied diplomatically. "Mr. Richard, it always seemed you preferred to keep your distance. We respected that. But I was missing out on so much, wasn't I?" "You were," confirmed Tyler. "We have incredible stories. We help each other through tough times, celebrate victories together. It's like a real family." Richard felt a deep melancholy for having lived like a stranger in his own home, isolated from people who could have enriched his life immensely. "Can I be part of this family now?" Richard asked with genuine humility. "Of course," Marcus replied. "But remember, family means being there through good and bad, supporting each other, being honest even when it's hard." "I'm willing to learn," Richard said sincerely. Eleanor approached her son. "Richard, I'm so proud of the change I see in you today. It's just the beginning, Mom. I have a lot of work to do to become the man I should have been all along. What matters is that you've started." Jennifer hugged her husband. "Richard, this is the version of you I fell in love with, the generous, humble man who cares about others. I hope I can keep being this version of myself." Marcus watched the couple and smiled. "Mr. Richard, may I offer some advice?" "Please. Real change doesn't happen overnight. It's a daily process. Some days will be easier than others. What matters is never giving up on trying to be better. How do you do it? How do you stay motivated every day?" I look at Emily and ask, what kind of world do I want to leave for her? What kind of example do I want to set? Then I make choices based on those answers. Richard reflected on Marcus's words. "I've never thought about the consequences of my actions that way." "It's never too late to start," Marcus said. Dorothy appeared on the porch. "Dinner is ready, and everyone be prepared. I made a little bit of everything." They all headed to the dining room, but Richard stopped Marcus on the way. "Marcus, before we go in, I want you to know that today, you gave me much more than a tennis lesson. You gave me a life lesson. We can all learn from each other, Mr. Richard. What matters is being open to those lessons. From now on, I want to be." They entered the dining room where a lavish table awaited them. Dorothy had outdone herself, preparing dishes that filled the house with delicious aromas. "Dorothy, you made all this in just a few hours?" Jennifer asked, impressed. "When you cook with love, things flow naturally," Dorothy replied with a smile. Over dinner, conversation flowed effortlessly. Richard made sure to ask about each person's life, their stories, dreams, and challenges. For the first time, he was genuinely interested in getting to know the people who worked for his family. Tyler shared his dream of studying agriculture and his ideas for sustainable gardening techniques. Anthony spoke about his security philosophy, how he saw his job not just as physical protection, but as creating an environment where everyone felt safe and respected. Dorothy shared her family recipes and how cooking was her way of showing love. Marcus talked about his passion for tennis and how the sport had taught him valuable lessons about perseverance, respect, and overcoming obstacles. Richard realized he had been living among fascinating people without ever taking the time to truly know them. "You're all incredible people," Richard said sincerely, "and I was a fool not to see it before." "What matters is that you see it now," Dorothy said maternally. "So what do we do from here?" Richard asked. "We build something beautiful together," Marcus replied. "The tennis school, the social programs, but most importantly, we built relationships based on mutual respect." Jennifer raised her glass. "To new beginnings and second chances. To the families we choose," added Eleanor. "To lessons that transform lives," contributed Marcus. "And to tennis, which teaches us so much more than just sports," finished Richard. Everyone toasted, and the sound of clinking glasses echoed through the room like a promise of better days ahead. When night fell, Marcus prepared to leave, but Richard stopped him. "Marcus, before you go, I'd like to formalize our partnership in the tennis school. Can we meet tomorrow to discuss the details?" "That would be perfect, Mr. Richard. And please, just call me Richard. We're partners now." "Richard," Marcus smiled. I like how that sounds. As Marcus walked to his car, all the other staff members followed him like a family seeing him off. Marcus, said Dorothy, thank you for showing all of us that dignity and character are always worth it. Thank you for always treating me like family, Marcus replied. Richard watched the scene from the porch and realized he was witnessing something beautiful, people genuinely caring for one another. Jennifer approached her husband. How do you feel? Different. Like I've woken up from a long sleep and finally see the world clearly. And what about the tennis school? I'm excited. For the first time in years, I'm excited about a project that's about more than just making money. It's going to change people's lives. Eleanor joined them. William would be proud of both of you today. Mom, I'd like you to be a partner in the school too. Your business knowledge and wisdom about people will be invaluable. It would be an honor, Eleanor replied. As Marcus drove home that night, he reflected on the extraordinary events of the day. In just a few hours, his life had completely changed, not just professionally, but in the way he felt he'd regained his dignity and purpose. When he arrived, he found Emily waiting on the couch as she always did. Dad, how was work today? Marcus sat beside his daughter and hugged her. Today was a very special day, sweetheart. Dad's going to teach tennis again. Really? Emily's eyes lit up. You're going to do what you love most again? I am, and maybe you can help me with some of the younger students. I'd love that. Emily paused. Dad, you seem different today. Happier. I am happy, Emily. Today, I remembered who I really am. You've always been my hero, Emily said, hugging him. Marcus felt tears in his eyes. All the humiliations, the struggles, the sacrifices, they had all been worth it to reach this moment. Emily, tomorrow you'll meet the family I work for. They want to help with your treatments. Are they nice? Very nice. And they can't wait to meet the most amazing girl in the world. Dad, do you think bad things sometimes happen so good things can come after? Marcus looked at his wise little girl and smiled. I think you just said something very profound, sweetheart. I learned it from you. You always say storms pass and the sun always shines again. And today, the sun shone brighter than it has in a long time. The next day, Richard woke with an unfamiliar feeling, positive anticipation. For the first time in years, he was genuinely excited to start a project. At breakfast, Jennifer remarked on the change in her husband's demeanor. Richard, you've been different since yesterday. How so? Lighter, like a weight's been lifted off your shoulders. That's exactly how I feel, like I've been carrying unnecessary baggage and finally let it go. What baggage? Arrogance, prejudices, the constant need to feel superior to others. It was exhausting to live like that, Jennifer smiled. I'm looking forward to meeting Emily today. Me too. Marcus speaks of her with so much love and pride that I already feel like I know her. When Marcus arrived with Emily that afternoon, the welcome was warm and genuine. The girl, despite her physical limitations, had a vibrant and intelligent personality that won everyone over immediately. So, you're the daddy who teaches tennis really well? Emily asked Richard, making everyone laugh. Well, actually, your daddy is the one who's going to teach me, Richard replied, but I hope to learn fast. Daddy's the best teacher in the world, Emily said proudly. He's so patient and explains everything in a way that's easy to understand. Richard looked at Marcus and saw the sparkle in the man's eyes as he listened to his daughter's words. Emily, Jennifer said, how about we check out the pool? I heard you love swimming. I do. The water makes me feel like I can fly. That afternoon, Emily swam while the adults discussed plans for the tennis academy. The girl adapted quickly to the environment, asking smart questions and showing impressive maturity for her age. Marcus, Richard said, as they watched Emily play in the pool, your daughter is exceptional. She teaches me something new every day about courage and positivity. I can see why you'd do anything for her. Anything within the bounds of dignity and honesty, Marcus corrected. I want her to be proud of the father she has. Richard reflected on his own motivations and realized he'd lost touch with real values long ago. Marcus, can I ask you a personal question? Of course. How do you make tough decisions? How do you know what the right choice is? I ask myself, what kind of world do I want to leave for Emily? What kind of example do I want to set? Then I choose based on those answers. That's an interesting approach. It works for me. When we focus on something bigger than ourselves, the right choices become clearer. Richard watched Emily laughing in the pool and understood Marcus's perspective better. I think I need to find my own something bigger. Maybe it's the tennis academy. Maybe it's the positive impact we can have on young lives. Maybe it's just being a better person every day. Maybe it's all of those together. That evening, after Marcus and Emily had left, Richard talked with Jennifer about the day. What did you think of Emily? She's amazing. So smart, brave, optimistic. It's easy to see why Marcus is so devoted to her. And it made me think about our own values, our own priorities. How so? Marcus has a clear purpose, to be the best father he can for Emily. I'm not sure what my purpose is beyond making money. Maybe it's time to find out. I think I already am. I want our family to be an example of how we can use our privileges to make a positive difference in people's lives. Jennifer hugged her husband. Now you sound like the man I fell in love with. In the months that followed, the tennis academy became a reality. Marcus rediscovered his passion for teaching. Richard found fulfillment in projects with social purpose, and the whole dynamic of the house changed for the better. The academy didn't just offer tennis lessons, but also personal development programs, scholarships, and community activities. It became a model for how businesses can create positive social impact. Marcus and Richard developed a genuine friendship, built on mutual respect and shared goals. The employer-employee dynamic had completely transformed into an equal partnership. Dorothy, Tyler, and Anthony also thrived in the new atmosphere. His children and families were included in the school's activities, creating a true extended community. Emily became the unofficial mascot of the school, inspiring other young people with her determination and positivity. Her treatments improved significantly, and she even began assisting as a helper in classes for younger children. A year after the famous tennis match, Richard reflected on the changes in his life during a conversation with Marcus. "Do you think I've become a better person?" Richard asked. "You've become the person you always had the potential to be," Marcus replied. "You just needed to find your way." And what was the turning point? When you chose to listen instead of speak, to learn instead of assume, and to connect instead of dominate. It was an expensive lesson, Richard admitted. The best lessons always are. But was it worth it? Richard looked around the tennis school bustling with activity, saw Emily laughing with other students, watched Jennifer organizing a charity event, and smiled. Every moment of discomfort and every bit of wounded pride was worth it. And now we keep building, we keep learning, we keep making a difference. Marcus extended his hand to Richard. "Partners?" "Always," Richard answered, shaking his friend's hand. The end. Now, tell me what you thought of this story of transformation and overcoming. Do you believe Richard truly changed, or will he fall back into old habits? And Marcus, do you think he was right to forgive so easily? Share your honest opinion in the comments. I love reading your thoughts on these life stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other heartwarming stories like this one.